But that moment of when someone has made an offer and then the other person yes ands it, takes that offer and moves it, that in that interaction where you don't know what's going to happen and where it's going to go is the holy moment. And that is, to me, is where the divine is living. In those moments where we connect with one another and truly respond from a deep place, and let it go where it goes. And we trust each other, that relationship piece that will to take it wherever it goes.
Welcome to Faith and What Resonates, a show that explores the intersection of faith, spirituality, music, and the nature of inspiration. I'm Gail Gallagher, and I'm a professional musician and lifelong seeker. I was raised both Catholic and Unitarian Universalist at the same time, and as I grew up sorting my theology, I found my spiritual ground in music and theater. On this show, I interview folks about their faith journeys and the role music plays in their lives as we explore the magic of the things that resonate. My guest today is Darrick Jackson. Darrick is an ordained UU minister, has taught at the UU Divinity School, Meadville, Lombard, and currently works with the UU Ministers Association. He specializes in combining improv and ministry and is also involved with the Chicago Playback Theater Ensemble. I sat down with Darrick at my kitchen table and we talked about improv, spirituality, moments when theater becomes a church, theater programs and mental health, playback theater, and theater of the oppressed, and many other points in between. A quick housekeeping note, this conversation was recorded with the windows open on a Friday afternoon in Chicago, so there will be car alarms and other such environmental sounds. That's that DIY podcast life, right? All right, here's the interview. All right, welcome to another episode of Faith and What Resonates, and I have my friend Darrick Jackson here. Hey, Darrick.
Hey.
And Darrick is in the same room with me.
It's exciting.
Yay, recording in the same room. So yeah, Darrick, I'm so happy to have you on the show. Tell the audience a little bit about who you are and what you do in the world.
Great. So I'm Darrick Jackson. I am currently serving as the Director of Ministries for Lifelong Learning for the Unitarian Universalist Ministers Association. So I'm an ordained minister. And I also am the co-associate director of the Chicago Playback Theater Ensemble. So ministry and theater are very much part of who I am.
That's so awesome. So I want to know how did this journey of combining ministry and theater start? Like, where did these things start in your life?
That's a really good question. So I kind of started with the theater piece, and I started in theater. I did theater pretty much all through school. Like anytime there was a chance, like in kindergarten was the first time I did a play. And anytime I had a chance to do theater or see theater, I wanted to do it. I was just in love with theater. And as I kind of navigated my own faith journey, I should probably say I grew up African Methodist Episcopal.
Okay.
And
what can you describe
yes.
what that flavor is exactly?
Yes. So it is comes out of the Methodist faith, but it was developed when back in the time when anyone who was black had to sit in the balcony and couldn't come down to actually attend worship, and so. And I'm blanking out his name, and of the who started the AME church. It will come to me. But he decided that to start his own church, so that would actually serve African Americans. And I am horrible with dates, so I cannot tell you exactly when that was, because that's not my strength or gift.
That's okay. We're theater
I
people.
know
We don't need to know numbers.
I know the stories.
Yeah, you know the story. You got
that's
it.
the piece. His last name was Allen. His first name will come to me, but because part of what I remembered is the youth group that I did in church was the Allen Christian Endeavor. So I said his last name was Allen. And so he started this church that drew on kind of the Methodist faith, but was really focused on the African American experience.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. So that is the tradition you grew up in.
True. Yep. So I grew up there, and as I grew older, I had my own struggles with the faith in two ways. One, I was starting to come out to myself and recognizing that there wasn't space for me. In fact, there was actively no space and no recognition of me in the faith. Mm-hmm. And also, the minister we had at the time was very fire and brimstone and just really very much in the realm of if you don't believe in Christ, then you are going to hell. And I was going to school with a lot of people who were Jewish and a lot of people of different faiths and who were really good people. And I couldn't understand why people who were good would be condemned to hell just because they didn't believe in a certain way. And so I really created a universalist viewpoint without recognizing that universalism was a thing. So I had this whole kind of sense of, if God is a God of love, which I really believed in, then God wants everyone to be saved and would never condemn anyone. So I had what I thought was this very secret kind of faith that I had developed and created. And so I left the church, but theater became my church. Because it was there where connections were happening and change, which I always felt was an important part of faith, is how you change and grow. And I was seeing the conversations that were happening because of theater. That's where it was happening, and just those deep connections and the magic that happens on stage and backstage and in the audience, with theater, was all part of that. And so it became my church home for a long time. And then when I finally discovered Unitarian Universalism and realized that there was a whole group of people who believed the same way I did.
You didn't invent this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, great. It's when I caught my call to ministry came really close after that. And I wrestled with it because I was like, how do I do, I want to do ministry. And I was also very involved in theater, and I had just started a theater company, and I want to put energy there. And I thought, how do I reconcile these two things of theater and ministry? And so one day I actually said to myself, or in some ways I guess I said to God, but I just kind of said, I will only do this ministry thing if I can find a way to connect theater to it. It may have been the next day, or definitely within the next week, I got the admissions packet from Andover Newton Theological School. And I'll never I opened the folder, and on the right-hand side was the brochure for Theology and the Arts with the artists in residence in theater. I was like, okay.
Okay, universe. Yes, and.
This is it.
Yeah.
And I was like, this must be where I need to go and do this, because they're actually having these conversations around how you connect theater and ministry. And I had that space for that. And so I think that's when it started, that I felt that I could. And I think then once I started the following year, when I started is when I got involved with a playback theater company in Boston.
Okay. Can you pick apart like the basics of that technique? Because I know a little bit about playback.
Yeah.
I know it's tangential to theater of the oppressed, but it's more like we're doing the thing that you said in front of you.
Yes. So in playback theater, we invite members of the audience to share their stories.
Okay.
And then we, as the performers, then play back the story, the essence of that story, using movement and sound. And we have a whole different ways of taking that story, and we rarely do it literally, like, retell the story. It's actually really using other ways of using metaphor and sound and song to capture that story. And as I like to think of it, we give you the gift of your story back to you.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. So there's a whole bunch of like techniques and thought within it, other
Yes.
than like what you see at an improv show, where they not to knock improv, I'm in that world, but like the comedic improv show versus the playback show, like there's a lot more nuance and stuff.
Yes.
Very cool.
Yes.
Very cool. Awesome. So let's see. I would love, so I've heard you do all these different sermons about improv and theater, and that is like part of why I'm like, please come to my show and talk about all the things. But I would love you to sort of unpack what your, I guess, core theology of improv is.
Yes. And this is something I'm still developing, and actually have a vision of doing a doctor of ministry on improv and ministry and all of that. So to delve into this more.
Yes.
But so there's several layers that I have when I think about the theology of improv. And one of the pieces that I'm really interested in working on is there's that special moment in the interaction between I'll talk about improv in general, but I also have slightly different with playback. But that moment of when someone has made an offer, and then the other person yes ands it, takes that offer and moves it, that in that interaction where you don't know what's going to happen and where it's going to go is the holy moment. And that is, to me, is where the divine is living. In those moments where we connect with one another and truly respond from a deep place, and let it go where it goes. And we trust each other, that relationship piece that will to take it wherever it goes. And so it's in that relationship. I very much believe in the divine as in relationship. And in playback theater, I feel it happens in multiple moments. It's there's the moment when there's the role called the conductor, which is the person who receives the story and helps guide the teller in the story, in the storytelling. And so there's a moment when the conductor is receiving that story and then giving the clues to the actors of how they will represent the story. And so there's that moment in the telling of it, and then the passing of it to the actors. There's that moment. There's the moment when the actors take this form that they're using to tell the story and make it come alive. And then there's that moment of the interaction of the teller seeing that story. And the moment when I think about when the conductor goes to the teller, says in different ways, like, how was that? Or what was that like for you? And get them to reflect on that experience. And those are holy moments of interaction where this one piece, the story, gets transformed in many different ways, from the teller through the conductor to the actors and then back to the teller.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. So the idea of the holy moment being that moment of anticipation, like that really jives with me. It makes me think of, what I said on like my first episode when I was talking to my friend Aiden, was it's this idea of like doing improv with the universe.
Yes.
Like when we pray or we ask for a particular thing, or it's like we're giving something, and God is our scene partner.
Yes.
You know.
Yes.
And I love that, of thinking of that in the theatrical aspect, and thinking of also the gift in playback theater of having someone trusting you with this like sacred story, or this vulnerable story, and then bringing it back to life, and that ritual and that care with it is really cool. And yeah, it's interesting. Like I'm going back to like the short form shows that I've done, but like I've done so many of these like audience participatory things, but like actually like honoring the vulnerability of that is really cool.
Right.
Yeah.
And a part of this is connected in Theater of the Oppressed. Augusto Boal talks about the spec actor, or where the spectators who are watching are actually participants. And and so when I put my theological lens into that, I do think that the universe is part of that, but it's also that in that engagement that whenever we're doing theater, whether it's improv or whether even it's traditional theater, that the audience is a part of that moment. And even in that moment, there's something, because the audience usually doesn't know. So if you've seen the show, even if you've seen the show multiple times, there's something special about that moment of actually seeing it and receiving it as it happens as in that time. And no show is exactly the same when you're doing live theater. There's always something that shifts or changes as you're in relationship with one another. So whether it's improv or whether it's comedy or theater, plays or musical theater, something always shifts. So you never ever see the same show twice. And so that there's a holiness there of kind of you're always constantly reconnecting, and so something shifts inside you in relationship to that. And to me, that's the divine. That's that interacting with what you're seeing. And so it is always, theater to me is always a holy experience.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so excited. That just makes me excited for theater to start to come back too. Like as things are starting to open up again, because we are recording this in July of 2021, so that's where we're living in the after time. We're not the after times, the post quarantine times.
Right.
But yeah, like anytime there are groups of people together, it's really a reminder that there's something magical and sacred here that we've been missing.
Yes.
So I know that you've mentioned before that you taught a class on ministry and improv at Meadville, and I would love to know a little bit about what that was like and sort of where you focused on that.
Oh yes, definitely. Definitely one of my favorite classes that I've taught, so in many ways, the class was a culmination, and I won't say culmination because that says that things ended, and and I think my work is still in progress. But it was one of the ways that I could bring together ministry and theater and improv together. And the idea behind it was that when we're doing ministry and we're engaging in ministry, we are engaging with people in the moment and being completely present, and we don't know what's going to be next, and we don't know how conversations are going to go. We don't know what people are bringing to it, and that's really what improv is being in that moment and being completely present. So I brought the idea of, if you bring on improv skills, you can actually be more present to others. And so I looked at it in that way. And so I started the class as actually just basic improv activities. And so it was a mini improv, like 101 course. It was an intensive course. So like the first 2 days was improv 101. And I also weaved in mindfulness because I really felt that mindfulness techniques are about being present. which would build into, which I actually think would be good for all improvers to actually, if you want to connect as an improv person spiritually, using mindfulness practices and being really present and attentive to what's going on around you helps build those skills so that when you're improving, you can draw on that in the moment. So we actually started with improv, and we did meditation every day at the beginning of the day, and then when we come back in the afternoon. And I would slyly increase the time every day to build people's ability to do mindfulness, and usually at some point someone noticed, like, is it getting longer? I was like, yes. Yes, it is.
I've closed the door.
Yeah, so we did Improv 101. And then the last part of the course was just thinking in improv in particular situations. And so we talked about, so we did thinking about preaching and being able to use improv as be able to actually preach extemporaneously and skills in doing that. I talked about improv in a pastoral way, and I talked about and did a little bit from the work I've done. Which is something I haven't talked about as well. So one of the other ministries I have done was involved with the Healing Moments Alzheimer's ministry, which teaches improv techniques to caregivers of people with Alzheimer's to help them be present with the person they're caring for. And so I would do a little bit from kind of our workshops to give them a sense of how to think about improv in kind of a pastoral way and in connecting. So that was a part of it. And then we would delve into thinking about improv in social justice, and that's when I would delve into theater of the oppressed, which is not something I have tons and tons of experience in. I have a little bit of practice in, so it was really just exploring kind of, theater of the oppressed and what it can do. And here's the way that improv lifts up social issues and creating space for conversation.
So my history with theater of the oppressed is my college honors thesis was experimenting with theater of the oppressed. Ooh. But I did not have a mentor within my theater program who was experienced with it. So I just was like reading books and doing experiments at like 22. So like I did go to the TO conference in Austin later that year, and I've dived on it before. But when I was studying it, I don't think I was mature enough to like really understand it.
Yes.
So like I always want to go back to it now that like I've grown as a human.
Yes, I've actually, every time I go back to it, I learn a little bit more. I understand it better. Because I think it is something that I think I may have been 25 when I first encountered it, and it was I thought it was really cool and I had pieces, but it wasn't until later that I was like, oh, I think I understand a little more depth, and I actually understand what justice means a little more and what they're trying to do with it. And so every time I go back to it, I keep pulling more out of it. And they're actually the next TO conference, because it's been canceled several times, but it's supposed to be here in Chicago, over at Loyola. And so I keep putting it on my calendar, and they cancel it. I was like, I want to go because it's going to be, because I live right practically on the Loyola campus. It's going to be literally across the street from me. I can actually go easily. And so I can delve even more deeply into that, because there's a lot of conversation that's happening around playback theater and theater of the oppressed and some of the intersections. And it's a thing that I've been curious about, of how do you bring some of those elements into playback, or bring some of the elements of playback into theater of the oppressed. And kind of another piece that I've been doing a lot of work with is just thinking about how do we really look at playback from different cultural perspectives. And so I've been part of forming a Black Indigenous People of Color playback group online that we've been meeting regularly, and part of some of the things that we've been thinking about is decolonizing playback in many ways. And really just thinking about, so what does it mean as people of color to engage in the structures, and what are the ways when the actual structures of playback actually limit us in the ways that we can connect with the teller or connect with the audience. And so we're just kind of creating the space where we just explore and see what happens. And it's been really fun and interesting. And it's a conversation that's, I think, starting to have sparks in the playback world in general, but I don't think it's not a huge conversation, but I think it's a conversation that's people are like, oh, that's interesting, and maybe we should think about it. Yeah.
That's great that those conversations are happening. I believe I first heard about playback at a TEO conference, and someone had some strong opinions about playback, and I don't even remember what the debate was, but I just remember getting the initial flag of like, oh, there's a Venn diagram conversation happening here. So that's cool that is being explored more and in depth in these really helpful ways.
Yes.
Yeah, and yeah, I'm sure the conversation of how do you decolonize playback is like, that sounds like an interesting rabbit hole for sure.
Yes.
Which to summarize, is a lot of it like that, just making sure that the performers are on stage are appropriate for the stories being told and stuff like that, or who can carry those journeys. And
that is a piece of it, but some of it is actually in the forms themselves of, and I think some of it was formed out of the idea of trying to say, playback is not therapy, and so there's a separation between the actors and the teller, and what does that mean, and some of the visions. And what we are kind of exploring is, how do we actually trust in that really truly intuitive space and be able to give what we feel the teller needs of the story and help guide that way, instead of feeling constrained. Well, the playback forums tell us we have to do things this way. And if something feels appropriate, or there's, someone feels that, to be able to say, I'm going to trust in that. And in many ways, in the group that we've been talking about, in many ways, they're actually talking about it in very spiritual ways. And we all have very different spiritual journeys. But, it's kind of, if the spirit says this is what the person needs, then why get in the way because the forum says we can't do that? But to be able to, in some ways, I think of it as moving past the forums, so letting them actually guide us in the way. I've been wrestling with this idea that the forums give us ways and to be able to to tap into our intuition and to be able to do that. But when we can really trust in that, then you can start to move beyond that. You don't need the forms in the same way.
Yeah.
And you can actually trust in your intuition. And I mean, there's some sort of sense of structure so that the other people kind of know what's going on.
It's a playbook.
Yeah.
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 But there's a lot more you can do within it that you say, right, in this form, we can't, we have to go in this particular order, and we can't break that, and only this number of people, and and we're starting to move beyond. It's like, well, yes, but we can also change that. If it means that normally if the forum says one person can only speak once, but another person needs to kind of stay in and bring in a different perspective, then it should happen. And releasing a lot of those sorts of norms. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. And I wonder if so it's interesting with forms, like when people are like, oh, well, you have to rehearse for improv, and it's like, yes, we have to like learn our playbook and stuff like that. And I believe, like forms are useful so you have a common language, but then you also have to train yourself to like know when people are starting to like tweak and break those rules and things. And I'm also curious if maybe perhaps the structural like conversation that's happening playback is part of like are and this is a bit of a tangent and we will go to questions, but are people who do playback, are they more are they like more theater people in their heart of hearts, or are they coming from like the more of the therapy basis? And do you think perhaps if you're coming at it from a more analytical mindset, is that part of why we're so attached to forms?
That's a really good question. As I think about where people come from in doing playback, people come from a wide variety of experiences. But I would say that a good number are not traditional theater who don't come with a particular theater background. That there's something about playback that they've been interested in or connected with. And it's interesting because as I think about like my playback ensemble, I would say most of us come out of a theater background. But as I think about all the connections that I've been making in the playback world, I don't hear about that aspect of people. And maybe I just don't know of it, but I know a large number of people who found out about playback and saw a show and wanted to do it. And that's actually the introduction to like the theater world, or improv has come out of playback. And many people who wouldn't even say had an improv background, had a playback background, and maybe took improv to learn some things that be helpful to do playback. Yeah.
No, it was something I was curious about. So awesome. There's so many rabbit holes we could probably go down with playback. Going back into questions, going from playback to just the general sense of play. So I've heard you do several in your sermons about improv. You've also emphasized the importance of play and the spirituality of play.
Yes.
So I would love you to riff on that essence of improv.
Yes. Well, I think play is really important because play allows us to. I think that, in fact, play allows us to connect with our spiritual nature. I think play, in many ways, is actually spiritual because. So I think sometimes when we think about those moments when we're like deeply connected to spirit, are those times when we're engaged and time passes by and we don't even notice it. We're like so present in the moment.
Yeah, it's that flow state thing.
Yes, that flow state. And I think play allows us to get into that flow state. And I think of it in different ways. One is it's doing things like improv and theater, or playing games and just kind of being with people in that connection, or even just playing solitaire and just letting the rhythm of the cards itself can be a meditation. Or art, when we're making art or being creative, that just letting the creativity flow out of us. And I also think that creativity is part of that spiritual, that creativity is divine energy. And so when we tap into divine energy, we're tapping into creative energy. And it's the places where I deeply connect with like creation stories. Because if you think about in all the traditions that talk about creation, there is a sense of everything's grounded in the sense of creating something. And so I think of creation as really kind of the initial spiritual act of spirituality. And so if we're using our creative juices and engaging them, we are being deeply spiritual. And I think so many times we tap that down because society kind of disapproves of the creativity piece and tries to have us be be lockstep in, you have to work and make money. It's the capitalist piece of thing that doesn't always have space for creativity.
Or like the thought of like, I'm making a thing, but how am I going to sell it?
Yes, exactly. But to be totally in the moment of, I'm creating this for the sake of creating, and enjoying that, and enjoying what you create, without judgment. Because I think often we've also set up the system where like art is something that you judge. And so people don't do artistic things because they don't want it to be judged, or they don't think it's good enough. And if we can actually move into that space of, I am making this because it's just what comes out of me, and learning to love what you make as it is, without trying to be something that you're going to have at the Art Institute.
Yeah. Or if you are in a position to make something for a particular audience, one thing that I found is helpful, instead of like, how do I sell this? It's more of like, who am I serving? What is the message I'm trying to communicate? If you make it more about like, what is the thing I'm communicating, that helps center it more, but then you're also not you're also giving yourself like a form to work in.
Right.
So I think, and what you were saying about the judgment thing just made me think of when I am teaching like writing or improv or things like that, the songwriting process, which I like to say writing is just slow improv that we do in our heads. But what I like to say is like your artist and your critic cannot be in the same room together. Your artist and your editor cannot be in the same room together. And to judge your work when you're still creating it is like yelling at eggs and flour for not being cake yet.
Right. I totally agree. And I like that piece about writing and improv, because when I do write and I'm in the space, it's the same feeling that I have when I'm doing improv or doing theater, is that when I get into that same state of engagement, that's when the writing flows and things comes out, and then I can actually engage, and it's the same. I feel like I'm tapping into the same energy, and so I do think that it's kind of related, or that, or even in in music and singing, or I mean, I remember this moment in college band and concert band, and it was like at the end of the season, and we were just playing music for the sake of music, because our concert was done, and we were playing Yesu Joy of Man's Desiring. And we were playing, and there was a moment in the song where I completely, and we all did, we got so, as an ensemble, so into the music, that the place where we're reading the music and just actually being the music, I mean, that line divided, and we were just playing, and it was just all of a sudden the song ended, and you could just feel in the room that just kind of like we were all coming back into the room, that we had all transported, but we were being carried by the music, and I've never had that exact at that level of experience in the same way. I mean, I've had that connection, but never being so much in the flow of the music that I was just like, I am not just playing the music, I am the music. And that to me that's spirituality.
Yeah.
Moments of being in that flow. And those are sometimes in theater, that's what happens when I'm on stage, when and sometimes even when preaching, where I step out and let the words or what's happening come through me. And that's always my goal when preaching, is to let go, which is why I preach extemporaneously. Because I'm so much a theater person that if I have a script, I am going to follow the script, because I have been taught as a theater person, here are my lines, and you say them. And so if I have an outline, I can just let the words come, and then I become a vehicle for the Spirit. And so that's important for me, to not just read, even as a person with a theater background, and knowing that I can read them well and convey that. It's more important for me to be the conduit for the Spirit.
Yeah. I love that. It's so funny what you say about needing to have a script versus extemporaneous. I find that like when I'm saying something live, like it's a lot easier for me to flow. But if I have to record things other than this podcast, but if I have to like record like a quick video, or God, if I have to do like a TikTok where it's like, okay, you have a minute, like I will obsess over what it is I need to say. Because as the spirit moves in me, it gets distracted by squirrels. And so that is the journey that we're on.
Yes.
Is how do you let that how do you focus that in over time?
Right.
Like figuring out that art for sure.
Yeah. And that's why I find the outline is important for me, is so that I can say, here's point, and I know then it keeps me from following too many squirrels.
Yeah. No, outlines definitely do help with the squirrels.
Yes.
Absolutely. So yes, that's our helpful life advice right now. So you mentioned my next question. You already sort of touched on, but I would love to hear a story of a particular moment of transcendence you've had on stage. I mean, you just told one, but I would love to hear another one.
Yes. I would say I can. Well, I'll tell the story of the very first time when I actually experienced it. And this was actually in high school. And we were doing Shakespeare play, All's Well That Ends Well, right? I think so. I think that was the right one.
That's how the story goes now.
That's the one we were doing. But I remember doing... So I was playing Duke Senior. So whichever play has Duke Senior, that's the one we were doing. And I had this scene, and I remember that I kind of got on stage and I did it, and there was a moment where I completely was in the character. Like I did it completely different than I had ever done it. The character was upset, and I had just, the emotion just came out of me, and all of a sudden I was in that space, and I felt the intensity of the character and the intensity of that moment, and I did it, and then as the scene ended and I was leaving is when I remembered that I was still on stage as I was going off stage. And I remember when the person who was in the scene with me was in complete shock because I was just completely different. But that's when I realized, you can actually, there's another level of being on theater than what I had kind of experienced or knew, that it wasn't just about being able to say the lines, but you can actually really feel the character. And so that was the first time it really kind of connected with me, of that sense of you can be completely in the moment and in that presence, and you can transcend everything. I mean, I completely forgotten I was on stage. I mean, I was in that character and in that moment completely. And I think that probably was one of the sparks that connected me to the spirituality of theater, was recognizing that. Yeah,
that's awesome. I absolutely love those moments as well. And I've had, and I'm curious if you ever played a historical character, like someone that's existed.
No, I'm just thinking, have I played any historical characters? I've done so much theater.
It's fair. No, yes. But so I went through a phase where I played both Rachel Corrie and Jean Donovan, which who are both outspoken white women in their 20s who went to foreign countries and got killed doing peace work. This is a character type, apparently. But with both of them when I was playing those characters, I had that moment of the character breaking through, but it was also can I call spooky on this, because this
person has passed and I'm performing their words. Like, can I call a spooky on this?
Right.
Because
Yes.
this is incredibly spooky.
Yes.
But I also love those moments, and I think that's why I like doing first source stuff is because you do have this connection with their words, and then you are honoring their their journey and their story in this really cool, reverent way.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, and when you say that, I was like, oh, right. It wasn't like historical, and I was thinking of like major historical figures, but I was just thinking, I did the play, kind of play musical, was it Angels, Punks, and Raging Queens?
Okay.
Which is, it's an amazing show. It's all monologues and songs. All the monologues are people who died from AIDS, and all the songs are the people who survived them. So it's this really moving piece. So I did one of those monologues, and I do remember it was like did we only do one show? Maybe two. No, we only did one show. But I do remember when I was on stage and I played a character in drag. And I do remember when I did that monologue that I fully, that moment, that had that moment of transcendence where all of a sudden I was that person in this fabulous dress in heels and moved in a way that showed a lot more comfortability of being in a dress and heels than I normally have. it just felt really smooth. I mean, I felt like this was, something I would do every day. I mean, I just felt like, yes, I am comfortable in this role, and I in these clothes and in these heels, and I'm saying it, and it just all came out. And I remember a friend of mine just commented on just kind of how that I did that, and she was like, and just how you swish the dress so that you could just see the heels, and all this thing that I was just like, I don't remember doing. I wasn't conscious. It was just the way that I felt the character just in that. I was in there, and I just knew this is exactly how they would be. Yeah. And they were there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that is the best, and I think it is really learning to find that, and part of that comes from learning to find that sense of play.
Yes.
And also getting more comfortable in your own body. Like
yes.
Which I will briefly step onto my favorite soapbox, which is I don't understand sometimes so I studied theater, and I do not understand how you can expect a bunch of 19-year-olds to go into a competitive situation with each other and then be incredibly self-aware as a degree. There's so much of my theater training that did not make sense until my late 20s, where I'm just like, oh my God. Also there's I do think there needs to also be a mental health aspect
I was just
to
thinking
theater.
Yes.
I mean, we can talk about our heart centers and our head centers and all these things, but somebody from the psychology department needs to come in and be like, hey, here's the let's put the rolling around on the floor off to the side, and let's talk about your brain a little bit.
Right.
That anyway, that's my favorite soapbox. I just wanted to I felt called to put that out there.
No, it's such an important piece that often gets missed is the mental piece, and that we get into the arts as in many ways as more as heart pieces and we separate it from the mental, but the fact that the way, and it has also a lot to do with just the way the systems of to be a professional artist. And this happens in, I think about all my musician friends, and all that, of the competitiveness that you're put into and the constant judging that you're engaged in, and that has a wear on your mental self and awareness of who you are. And if you haven't been able to do the work, or someone hasn't worked with you to prepare you for the mental onslaught of what that takes to do this work, when you're actually subjecting yourself to the review of others who don't have any sort of training on how to do that with any sort of compassion. That it's why I see this in conversation with a lot of people who so many, find themselves that just like the mental breakdown that happens among actors, is immense. And then the not talking about it because, well, we can't talk about mental health, so no one talks about it. But it's everybody's engaging with it.
We can talk about the mental health of our character.
Right. But we can't talk about our mental health, which I'm actually seeing is a change that's happening recently in the last few years of actors actually talking about mental health and they're struggling and how that, how being open about how theater as a occupation is cruel.
Yeah. And it's really hard to be in the moment when you're in the moment. Mind chatter is your fear of what other people are thinking about you while you're being in the moment.
Right. Exactly. Yes.
Also when you're 20.
Right. Right.
But yeah, no, I think the conversation is starting to shift and change more, and it's very important. And I think I also think the more we talk about like what healthy improv is and what healthy performance is and what it feels like when you are connected is also like a helpful linchpin for sure.
Yes, I totally agree, and I think it's also the place where I see the kind of the spiritual strength is also important because I think that part of the spiritual work helps you ground you in a stronger sense of self, which at 19 is really hard to have. But it gives you that grounding that some ways that coupled with the kind of the mental health, I think allows you to be able to be present in a different way. That when you can actually go to an audition and you can be in a place of, I feel spiritual grounded. I want this and I don't care what they think. But I am going to give my best and I'm going to be completely in the moment. I think that's when our auditions become the best. And even if we don't get the part, we also get remembered so that maybe you might not get that part, but they remember you because they see your best. And when we're so caught up in all the things that could go wrong and don't have anything that's grounding us to be present in the moment, and we're so off in different places, then we can't show all that we can do.
Well, and thinking about, thinking about like how do we also have the conversation about spirituality when we're talking about college students in an academic theater program in a way that is like, I think it's awesome that like even since I've been in college, like mindfulness and like meditation and like all of these things, which I think I first meditated in a theater class and like and first did yoga in a theater class, and like I don't know, like and I don't know if it needs to be like a psychology and also maybe unpack some of your religious trauma now that you're out of the house class.
Yes.
Because also I think of like 19-year-old theater people who are like, out of or in college, away from their family, focus, figuring out what their spiritual ground is. And like campus ministries are always very strong, but then there's always like the street preachers and like all these things. And like, it's like, okay, we need to talk about spirituality and figure out what the language is that works best for people, but then also acknowledge that they might have some trauma because they are theater kids. And so if they grew up in a Christian tradition, here we are.
Right.
Like,
Right.
This is your story, this is my story,
Right. Yes.
How do you reconcile all that?
Yeah. I think that's important. I mean, and it's actually a thing that I've actually in my head of it thinking what we should be doing in Unitarian Universalism, that there should actually be a reconciling with your religious paths and dealing with that, because we have so many people coming in from other faiths who have been traumatized by their experience, and then and who engage in Unitarian Universalism because believe in the principles and believe in the space, the space where there's this openness, but are still traumatized, and there's no place to actually engage in that spiritual trauma that would actually help them be better Unitarian Universalists if they've been able to work with it, because at some point that trauma comes out. And then you see it manifesting in new spaces.
Yeah.
And harming things in different ways, or starting harming or re-traumatizing people in different ways. And I would also say, I think probably all different faiths, because people switch and change all the time, and a lot of times people change faith because of trauma. And so if there's actually, it feels like that that's such an important piece that we don't do a lot of engaging in as human beings, of recognizing that there is spiritual trauma, and how do we, in our part of welcoming people into faith, also say, let's talk about what spiritual trauma is and how to work through that, so that you can actually come in healthy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. And how do you, if you've fallen away from a faith, how do you figure out what you want to keep and what is useful?
Yes.
And I think, it makes me so happy that we have like that mindfulness and other techniques are being talked about more.
Yes.
So it's like, okay, this is here's some science.
Right.
Here's some science with that. Like,
yes.
this is not grounded in any dogma, and it will help you with your spirit. Here you go.
Right.
Oh man. Yeah. There's now my mind is designing like some ideal campus ministry, and that's a fun rabbit hole. But we are sort of in our wrap up place. So I'm going to ask the question that I try to ask every time, which is, where does inspiration live in your body?
I find inspiration right in my heart. I think that's where it lives. When I look for inspiration, I go to my heart center.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. That seems to be the universal question. So is there a different sense from like when you're like experiencing like a particular piece of music or a show, like where things land that way?
I think it still
Yeah.
stays in that space. As I may reframe as I think, because I think actually when I think of inspiration that I receive is from the heart, but I think as I think about inspiration when I'm creating, particularly in writing or preaching, it actually is in my third eye.
Okay.
Yeah, and I said that as I think, it's like, wait, no, actually, that is actually, and I think it is because I always feel in those moments that that's where my spiritual connection is, and that's where I do receive inspiration, and so that I think is the place there where when I'm opening to that sort of inspiration, it comes there. If I'm doing art, I would say that comes into my heart. It was like when so I'm thinking of like if there was a time when I used to do collages and things like that. That came out of my heart, and that was that piece. But I think when I'm doing things that are more spiritually connected, that inspiration is out of my third eye. Yeah.
Nice. Everyone has like a slightly different answer on that, and it's just my favorite question to ask. Well, this has been an amazing conversation, and I hope that listeners get there's so many takeaways and rabbit holes and thoughts that happened, and I'm super curious what people think about it. Do you have anywhere you want to send people to connect with you, learn more about playback theater, any of that good stuff?
Yeah, I am, not that I post a lot, I'm not a huge poster, but you can find me on social media at Rev Darrick, RevDarrick, on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you want to, you can follow the Chicago Playback Theater Ensemble. And I probably should have pulled in the actual link. We can, if you look
I
on
will
Facebook.
link it in the show
Great.
notes.
But yeah, follow us if you're interested in our work. And we're right now in this place of engaging we've been doing work virtually and kind of in this place of exploring whether virtual will continue to be a part of what we do or just move to in person or what that's going to look like. But our season is ended now, but yeah, follow us and you might get a chance to see a little bit of what playback is.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you for being on the show. This was such a great conversation.
Thank you for asking me.
On this. Yeah, of course. Awesome.
Thank you for listening to Faith and What Resonates. The theme music for the show is an original composition called My Journey, My Song, the first song I wrote when I was 19. Faith and What Resonates is part of the New Faith New Media Network. You can discuss this and future episodes in the New Faith New Media Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/NFNM group. You can also follow us on social media, and those links are in the show notes. We have several other shows, including A Pastor and a Priest Walk into a Movie Theater, and you can access all of these shows by subscribing to New Faith New Media wherever you get your podcast. You can also support the New Faith New Media Network on Patreon. All Patreon supporters get access to our Patreon exclusive podcast, Blessed Lunatics, where the founding members of the New Faith New Media explore the divine through laughter, which means we usually drink and share stories and make jokes about our different faith backgrounds. Actually, there's an episode where I share the backstory of this song you're hearing right now. Finally, if you want to know more about my music, you can head to my website, gailgallaghermusic.com. Thanks for listening, and remember to stay curious and keep following the magic of the things that resonate.
New Faith, New Media.
Theology.
Nerdery.
Community.
Yeah.
New Faith, New Media.
Theology.
Nerdery.
Community.